Hey screen printers, it's Ryan from Ryonet. And in this video, you're going to learn what screen printing discharge ink is. The shirt that I'm wearing today was given to me by Keith from the Longview Garage in Texas. Thank you very much, Keith, for the awesome American Apparel shirt. All right, so discharge ink is essentially a water-based ink that does something a little bit different than most plastisol and water-based inks. Instead of being a base that has a pigment in it to color the ink that's printed and then cured into the garment, the discharge ink actually sets into the garment and then bleaches out or re-dyes the garment another color. Because there's a re-dyeing process, it only is geared for darker garments. So a shirt like this wouldn't discharge because there's no pigment or no color in the shirt to discharge out. It works great on a black shirt because essentially think of discharge like bleach. If you're going to bleach a white shirt, you wouldn't see anything, but if you're going to bleach a black shirt, you'd see the bleach reacting with the cotton. Speaking of cotton, discharge only works with cotton because the polyester fibers hold the dye of the color differently and do not release it underneath the discharge ink. So discharge ink is a water-based ink, once again, that you mix in either clear or a pigment into the ink if we want to color it. So right here, this is yellow pigment to make a yellow discharge. Discharge ink does need to be activated with an agent. Typical activation rate is 5%. So essentially, we place an empty container on our scale right here. We zero it out at 0 grams. Let's say we're going to mix, let's say, 50 grams, 51 grams of ink. So that means I would mix 2.5 grams of the agent approximately. You don't need to mix the exact amount into the base. Now this activating agent for most discharge does have a formaldehyde component to it. So you do need to use this in a ventilated area. You don't want to use this in closed quarters. And if you're going to be handling it with your direct hand contact, you do want to use gloves with it. So once the activating agent is mixed in, the discharge ink typically lasts for 4 to 8 hours. So it does have a shelf life, and you do only want to mix what you're going to be using approximately for the job. So now the ink starts to bubble up slightly. I don't know if you can see that close on the camera there, but that's how you can tell it's activated. So let's see what happens to a shirt with activated discharge without a pigment in it. Now this is a water base. Water base does cure at 320 degrees. However, it does take a little bit more energy to cure a water base than versus, let's say, a plastisol. So there's a little discharge just rubbed on the shirt right there. The reason why it takes more energy is because that water has to evaporate out of the shirt before it will actually cure. So I'm actually using a heat gun right now, which is forcing hot air into the garment. And you'll see this discharge process happen as this heats up to 320 degrees. Now, if you're using a flash dryer, a forced air flash dryer is optimal. If you're using a conveyor dryer, a forced air conveyor dryer is optimal. If you don't have forced air to drive out the water and then discharge the ink, it will happen. It'll just take a lot longer. Think of it like your clothes. If you don't put them in the dryer and leave them out to dry, yeah, they still dry. It just takes a little bit longer for them to dry. So you can see the discharge process happening and the fibers of this shirt actually going back to its natural cotton state. So it doesn't go all the way white. It goes back to your natural color of the garment, which is kind of your natural cotton color. Because discharge actually needs to penetrate the garment in order for it to work, we actually use it with a little bit lower of mesh than a traditional water-based or plastisol. So you want it to soak into the garment. Printing with a 110 to a 156 mesh is pretty typical when using discharge. If I wanted to make this, let's say, into a yellow discharge, I simply add about 10% of our CMS pigment. So I'm going to add 5 grams of pigment there. And then I mix it up accordingly. Once the pigment is mixed in, as you can see, the yellow discharge is not only taking out the fiber, taking out the color of the shirt, it's leaving the shirt a yellow pigmented color once discharged into it. So right now you can tell the shirt's discharged when it changes color. If it's still wet, that means that part has not discharged. Obviously, there's a lot of discharge right here, much more than if we were to screen print it. But that's how a pigmented discharge will work. Check out everything that you need for discharge printing, including the bases, the agent, and all the pigments available on our website.